Will I go on Rogan's podcast? I asked him, and our PR people asked him about a bajillion times to go on for my book. We did not get a response as far as I know, so I don't know what happened there. It's a little weird for me to say that publicly.
Here I am, drunk alone again. Seems like Jesus is my only friend. When I first started writing music, I was afraid that people would hate it, or afraid that they would laugh at me. Then, over time, this fear was replaced by a deeper, more substantial fear. The fear that nobody would even pay attention, that it would go unnoticed, as if it never happened. A thazagoraphobia, the fear of being ignored. What is there about fire that's so lovely? No matter what age we are, what draws us to it? That's a quote from a really good book. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This is a sci-fi classic in which books are banned by the authorities to stop people from thinking critically. But we'll talk more about this later. The intellectual dark web. Sounds sexy and mysterious, doesn't it? This is the name given to a group of people who claim that they're being censored because they're touching on topics that are too edgy and out there. Free speech extremists, if you will.
People ask me, what is the intellectual dark web? All I think it is people who are open-minded. That's all. People who are willing to have conversations that you're really not supposed to have these days. And by that I mean any conversation at all.
You've got Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, just to name a few. Dave Rubin has released a new book. Don't burn this book.
Denham's Dentifrice. Call the number on the screen now to buy yours today.
Dave Rubin's book is supposed to explore the idea of having ideas that some people perceive as dangerous. Which begs the question, is Dave Rubin only interested in the idea of having ideas? Or are there any specific ideas that he wants to elevate? And if so, what potential laws and policies are threatening the free exchange of these ideas? Because we can get wrapped up in culture wars and silly abstractions, but at the end of the day, we're voting for parties and politicians that are enacting laws and policies. So the question is, what potential policies does Dave Rubin oppose? And what are the ideas that he is trying to elevate? The progressive woke machine is waging war against the last free thinkers of the world, where differences of opinion can bring relationships, personal and professional, to a sudden end. Now, you might be asking yourself, where did I get this cool red chair? And the answer is that I can load any object into this void of solitude. And you may also ask yourself, well, how did I get here? But those are just some lyrics from a song by the Talking Heads. Now, in all seriousness, you might be asking yourself, what about that clip I showed you at the start of the video, where Dave Rubin was asking Joe Rogan to go on his podcast to promote this book? Joe Rogan seems to have recently cut ties with Dave Rubin, ending their personal and professional relationship due to a difference of opinion. And he's not the only one. Brett and Eric Weinstein, two other members of the intellectual dark web, have also recently cut ties with Dave Rubin. And that clip I showed you of Ben Shapiro, in that video, he names various members of the intellectual dark web, and he leaves Dave Rubin out of the video. Are Joe Rogan, the Weinstein brothers, and Ben Shapiro part of the progressive woke machine? Or, alternatively, are they distancing themselves from Dave Rubin because he's hurting the intellectual dark web brand that they've worked so hard to establish?
Look, I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson, and I love when Ben Shapiro destroys the left with facts and logic, but I think we can all agree that Dave Rubin just ain't too bright.
Have you ever heard of the term useful idiot? It's used to describe someone who's unknowingly forwarding a political agenda. You can think of Dave Rubin as a useless idiot, in that he's unknowingly hating a political agenda. Okay, maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh. I haven't even opened the book yet. So let's talk about some of Dave Rubin's ideas, shall we? Dave uses this book to expand on his political ideology, advocating individual rights and limited government. Which really begs the question, what exactly does he mean by limited government? Does he mean defunding the police and decreasing military spending? Or does limited government refer to removing worker protections and regulations to increase profits for the ruling class? He aims to teach you the fine art of checking your facts, not your privilege, on topics such as climate change and hate crimes. Because we all know it's the left who don't listen to the science on climate change. And as far as hate crimes are concerned, well, to best approach this, we need to talk about some of the last remaining free thinkers who have recently been banned off YouTube. As you may be aware, Stefan Molyneux was recently banned off Twitter and YouTube. Let's take a look at Stefan Molyneux talking with Jordan Peterson. The same Jordan Peterson who co-signed Dave Rubin's book. In this clip, watch how Stefan Molyneux and Jordan Peterson discuss the hard truths regarding race and IQ.
And there's some things about this that we really have to take seriously, and this is where some of the uglier elements of science become germane. So IQ is a particularly ugly aspect of science because the IQ literature reveals that which no one would want to be the case, which is that there are profound and virtually irremediable differences in people's cognitive performance, and that those differences have a very solid biological and heritable basis. No one wants to hear that. They don't want to hear that it's biological. They don't want to hear that it's heritable. They don't want to hear it's permanent. They don't want to hear that it's irremediable and that it actually has a practical consequence. And no wonder they don't want to hear it.
Well, and even worse, they don't want to hear that it differs between genders and ethnicities. That is, to me, one of the most painful things that I've ever learned in my life is this kind of information. It is one of the great heartbreaks when it comes to the dream of pure egalitarianism. And that is, I think, even harder. It's an even harder pill for people to swallow.
Yikes. Those are some pretty high-level, important ideas right there. Now, here you've got a cross-section of a regular person's brain. You've got the various subsections like the pituitary gland or the temporal lobe. But after listening to a conversation like that, your brain is likely to be in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level, important ideas. And it's here that we need to return to this concept of vague platitudes about the idea of having dangerous ideas. Because once you start getting specific about these dangerous ideas, you find that the people who want to talk about them are just one step away from breaking out the calipers to measure brain sizes, as is the case with Stefan Molyneux, who Dave Rubin claimed was part of the new centre in politics.
So 5 years ago, where liberals and conservatives were just fighting about everything, Now, actually, there's a new center developing, and I think both of us are sort of in that, not in the exact same political part.
I go to Poland. What is it, 99% white? I don't need any security. The streets are incredibly clean. Crime is almost non-existent. Nobody gets called a racist. There's no talk of white privilege. No identity politics. No endless diversity nagging. You know, I've spoken against white nationalism, but I'm an empiricist. I'm an empiricist.
And this is the reason why the rest of the intellectual dark web have been distancing themselves from Dave Rubin recently, because the other members understand that you can't get too close to the blatant racists who want to use the free speech movement to further their political agenda, whereas Dave Rubin will happily give a platform to any old racist or bigot and sit there with a blank look on his face while they spout dangerous rhetoric completely unchallenged. If you want to understand the intellectual dark web, you can use Stefan Molyneux as a skeleton key to expose them for what they really are. For example, take a look at this heat map of creators, which illustrates the crossover between audiences. This diagram shows you how the audiences of Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson overlap with the audiences of Richard Spencer, Gavin McInnes and Stefan Molyneux, who are more blatant racists who are using this free speech brigade to further their political agenda. These other guys that I just mentioned, Richard Spencer, Gavin McInnes, Stefan Molyneux, they're also having conversations you're not supposed to have. But you'll notice that Jordan Peterson, Eric Weinstein and Ben Shapiro won't include them in the intellectual dark web because they're smart enough to try and build a brand that has plausible deniability of having direct connection to racists. Dave Rubin, on the other hand, doesn't seem to be smart enough to keep his distance from the more extreme fringes of this free speech network. Dave wants you to burn this book. In fact, he's begging you to burn this book. Back in 2016, Steven Crowder tried to claim that he was being banned from speaking on a college campus, when in reality he was just making crazy demands like a diva in order to get himself banned. Because optically, if you can make it seem like you're being censored, it helps to propagate this narrative that the woke, lefty SJWs are trying to silence free thinkers. And it's kind of an allegory for this book. Just like Steven Crowder wanted to be banned from speaking on a college campus, Dave Rubin wants you to burn this book and hopes that the act of burning it will create more traction for his movement than people actually reading it. I couldn't make this video without talking about Fahrenheit 451, the sci-fi classic about book burning. I just want to read a few passages from this book and talk about how they relate to Dave Rubin's book. Coloured people don't like Little Black Sambo? Burn it. White people don't feel good about Uncle Tom's Cabin? Burn it. Someone's written a book on tobacco and cancer of the lungs. The cigarette people are weeping. Burn the book. Serenity, Montag. Peace, Montag. This book is about those who want to protect capitalism and ignore the history of oppression, which is exactly what Dave Rubin is trying to do with his book. At one point in the book, the main character has what he thinks may be the last Bible in the United States, and he takes it to an English professor to show him. It's been a long time. I'm not a religious man, but it's been a long time. Faber turned the pages, stopping here and there to read. It's as good as I remember. Lord, how they've changed it in our parlours these days. Christ is one of the family now, I often wonder if God recognises his own son the way we've dressed him up, or is it dressed him down? He's a regular peppermint stick now, all sugar crystal and saccharine, when he isn't making veiled references to certain commercial products that every worshipper absolutely needs. This book is anti-capitalist, and this passage here illustrates how the profit motive in this reality supersedes religion, and that Jesus and the Bible are used to sell commercial products to consumers. Before I end this video, I want to leave you with one last passage from this book. There are many great quotes in this book, and I recommend that you read it. But arguably the best one comes about halfway through, and it's when the evil fire captain is recounting a dream he had the night before. In the dream, he's trying to convince the main character that books are evil. In the dream, the fire captain quotes Shakespeare, a proverb from The Merchant of Venice. The devil can cite scripture for his purpose. Now, this is profound because this fire captain is quoting Shakespeare to explain why Shakespeare shouldn't be read. But it takes on a deeper meaning when you consider that Dave Rubin is trying to use this book that is anti-capitalist and anti-oppression to forward his oppressive capitalist ideology. Please write more books, Dave. Not only am I not going to burn this book, I'm going to show it to people as a deterrent to right-wing ideology. It's actually really useful for that purpose. Just as I finished recording this video, I found out about the passing of Michael Brooks. While I was making this video, I was constantly thinking to myself, I hope this makes Michael Brooks laugh. Michael was a huge influence on me and helped build my worldview and my political view, and it's absolutely devastating. If you're going to read a book about modern politics, don't bother with this embarrassing book by Dave Rubin. Instead, read Michael's book, Against the Web, where he tells you how to deconstruct the terrible ideas by the likes of Dave Rubin. This book is by far and away, by leaps and bounds, better than Dave Rubin's book, and you should read this book instead. Rest in peace, Michael Brooks.